It's my pleasure to welcome everyone today. So I'm Rachel Bevan, I'm Director of Statistics Division at UN ESCAP, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's Asia Pacific Stats Cafe, where we'll be looking at data governance. So at our 8th ESCAP Committee on Statistics, which we held in August 2022, we agreed to feature data governance in our future work, but really to have an emphasis on sharing country experiences. And since then, we've developed a data governance framework, which we discussed in detail with countries at an expert group last year, and which I know some of the people on the panel today were participating in, so that's great. And then we've also developed a series of one-page data governance profiles. So you'll be hearing more about both of those through today's cafe. We've also put together a short video on the data governance framework. So I hope that if you haven't already had a chance to watch that, please do go back. There's a QR code on the invitation, and it's also on our website as well. And of course, my team have put it into the chat as well. So do have a look at that video to give you a bit more background as well. It's nice and short. We've also organised these stats cafes by sub-region, and that was really to actually give us a bit more time to actually hear from countries about the topic, and recognising that it is such a big topic. We thought we had far too much material to just do one stats cafe. So this is actually the 4th and final one in our current series on data governance. So we've looked at each of the sub-regions except for the Southeast Asia sub-region, because we'd already done an earlier event with ASEAN countries. But today we're hearing from countries from North and Central Asia sub-region. So it's great that we can be joined today by Georgia, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, as well as hearing from Teke from UNECE. So we want to try and keep it as well to be a really interactive panel. I know we can't be there kind of in person, but we do really want to encourage you to take part. So we've got audience polls throughout the session so that everyone can participate. And we've also, of course, got the chat function as well. So as you kind of listen to what people are saying, do please post any questions you can think of in the chat, and we will come to those at the end. And we are really going to try to kind of keep things moving quite quickly so that we do have enough time at the end to ask those questions. So it's my pleasure now then to hand over to our moderator today, who is Jonathan Palmer, and he's going to be introducing our panel and also helping to really guide us through this session. So over to you, Jonathan.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Welcome, audience. Welcome, North and Central Asia, to this final Stats Cafe of this series, but I'm sure it's not the last discussion on this important topic. And I thank ESCAP for this opportunity to be part of the discussion about data governance. It's a very important topic, and there's a lot of very interesting things happening in that area, as we will hear. So first of all, welcome to our distinguished panel. I won't go into any great detail. The flyer has the short bios, but we have chief statisticians, deputies, heads of methodology, and also a prominent esteemed advisor, expert in statistical systems. So a very good panel, of course, representing 3 different countries as well. So the bulk of this cafe is going to be a discussion with the panel. And as Rachel said, we've done a good job of leaving plenty of time for questions from the audience. So as she said, if you've got any questions, you can start putting them now, if you like, into the chat, and we'll work back to get to those later on. But before we get to our discussion with the panelists, I just want to do a bit of scene setting with a short presentation of my own, and I'll share my screen to get that started. So the data governance landscape is changing a lot, and ESCAP is showing great initiative in promoting the sharing of data and experiences in this area. And to this end, they've developed an excellent framework, which we've implemented through these one-page profiles. And as Rachel said, if you haven't yet looked at the video attached to the Stats Cafe on the website there, do so, because it's a very good introduction of the framework. But first of all, a definition. So we're talking about data governance, and the definition is pretty straightforward. It's defined as the exercise of authority and control over the management and transformation of data with the objective of unlocking value, enhancing the value of the asset or reducing risk. So it's essentially about that management and transformation of data. And so how does this relate to statistical agencies? Statistical agencies draw their data to produce official statistics from two primary sources. It's been this way for a long time. Data derived from surveys and censuses, and data gathered from various administrative systems owned by government. Now, of course, there's also this pool of data, big data and private sector data, that is of immense interest. And I'm sure that in a few years' time, we'll be talking about data governance of private sector and big data for official statistics, but that's not really the topic today. So we're going to focus on these areas of admin and statistical data. Now, statisticians usually have clear authority over their statistical data, and often that authority expands across the whole NSS. So it's not just their authority over what the NSO does, but often what other agencies in the National Statistical System do. And so we've got the authority to collect, to coordinate, to integrate and disseminate. But there's always some limits on that authority. We can only disseminate in a way that preserves confidentiality and privacy. We can only collect in a way that minimises burden. So we're all used to this landscape. When it comes to administrative data, it's a little less clear, the authority of statisticians. In some legislation, they've got the authority to be consulted. They've got the authority to set standards for the data. There may be a legal obligation for the statistician to be consulted in the event of changes to the administrative data. But this is something, when I've looked at legislation across lots of countries, there's no one size fits all solution here. There's a lot of different practices around the extent to which statisticians can influence and manage administrative data. So commonly, statisticians have the authority to at least use administrative data, although they don't always get welcomed. Their requests for access don't always get welcomed. They've often got authority to set standards, and less common is the authority to integrate administrative data for research or policy purposes, as opposed to dissemination of statistics. And they may not have the authority to influence the data quality. So those are the areas we'll be exploring today. Who has the authority? What kind of authority? Who should have the authority? And one interesting little taxonomy that has been developed that I think is very useful is what we're seeing is countries tend to fall into one of these three categories. So the NSO has a clear mandate as a whole of government steward. We see that in New Zealand particularly, and it's also there in Ireland. We see in most countries probably the NSO being a partner. They're managing data in the statistical system, and some others are managing it elsewhere. And then in some countries, often out of their e-government initiatives or digital government, they've established new authorities that have a whole of government authority around the management of data. So I'm going to end my presentation there with the comment that statisticians really are major stakeholders when it comes to the governance of data. Obviously, we're all keenly interested in having a governance framework that gives us the authority we need to produce official statistics, and we're also interested in the authority given to others because that can have an impact on us. So let's start by considering the authority of government statisticians. Now, Rachel, you mentioned audience polling, and what we'll be doing during this session is we'll put our first one up in the chat now. So throughout this panel, we're just going to pose a few questions to you. Now, if you don't represent a particular country, please answer the question anyway. Think of your favourite country or whoever you might want to represent and answer. It's better that we get as many answers as possible. So our first audience question today is, does your government have a clear vision and intent for the enhanced governance of government data? So if you could answer that. And while you're doing that, I'd like to move on to our panel now. So let's give our audience a bit of an exposure to your specific country's situation. So I'm going to display each of your one-page profiles where I've got them and ask you to give us an elevator speech, you know, the speech you make when you happen to be in the elevator with your minister and you've got 13 floors to explain something important before you hit the ground floor and he goes to lunch or she goes to lunch. So is there strong demand for better stewardship of government data? What institutions play the leading roles in your country, and what is the role of your National Statistics Office? So I'll go back to sharing and I'll pull up the, I've got to find the window, make sure I've got the right screen. Excuse me for 1 second. I want to pull up Tajikistan. I'm pretty sure I've got it now. There we go. We got Tajikistan there. I think we have. So, Kiom, would you mind starting off in our elevator discussion? How do things work in Tajikistan?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Yes, of course. Now you can see this profile. It's well prepared, actually. First of all, let me, using this opportunity, thanks ESCAP for organizing this Stats Café online and discussing this very important issue. So here I can say that for these questions that you provided, it's first of all a strong demand for better stewardship. Of course, in Tajikistan there is demand for data stewardship, and it starts. And it's relating to the e-government concept that was adopted from 2011. So in this regard, I can say that Tajikistan, especially government of Tajikistan, relies on data from Statistical Office, which is Statistical Office, as you can see, is a central statistical office of the country, and it's administratively autonomous, and its head serves as a country's chief statistician. So especially presidents, we can say our president relies on data from NSO, from Agency on Statistics, under the President of the Republic of Tajikistan. We have the main source. Even there is administrative data from other sectors, but our president, our government relies on our data, on NSO data. So the leading role institution is, of course, you can see, as I mentioned, this statistical agency, and it's the official source. We can say that from our office, and here you can also see that there is an interdepartmental council that it's working in two levels. It's in a high level and in a lower level. In a high level, it's heading with prime minister, and all other ministers are part of this interdepartmental council. And at the lower level, it's heading by director of Agency on Statistics, and the deputy ministers are member of this council. And in this, we are solving issues relating to statistics, and at least 2 times in a year we have meetings. So relating to this, for this last question that was provided, what is the role of your NSO? Of course, NSO has a leading role with respect to administrative data, because NSO calculate the main macroeconomic indicators like GDP, GNI, poverty rate, unemployment rate. So, and we collect, based on the forms, other ministries, other agencies have to provide all data to NSO for calculating some other main indicators for the country. In addition, I can share here that there is a methodological council in a statistic agency, which all the forms, instructions will be adopted by the head of methodological council, which is director of agency on statistics. And all ministries that want to collect some new data, they have to provide to make this form or questionnaire prepared and sent to statistical council, to agency on statistics for approving. Based on it, they will start collecting data for in their sector or relating to their work. For example, we can say that there is a lot of forms in to Ministry of Health. They sent to us and we approved it, our statistical council, and then we sent to them that they can start collecting data, and they have to provide aggregated data based on this forms to statistical office.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So you operate as a clearinghouse for all government survey and census data collections, and as a result, you're required to get the data back. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you very much, and we look forward to asking you some more questions soon. But now, Gogita, would you like to tell us a bit about the situation there in Georgia? It's a little bit different, isn't it?
Hello once again. It is my great pleasure to be here and join these distinguished panelists. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the organizers of this meeting for inviting me to this important session and having the opportunity to reflect my opinion. First of all, let me start with highlighting the role and importance of administrative and government data for production of official statistics, which allows us to produce more indicators to address the increased demand on statistical data from different sources, to reduce the respondent burden, and at the same time to save resources, which is always limited, especially for us, for statisticians. Conduct survey is a simple solution to collect data, of course, in case when you have enough resources. However, issues related respondent burden and issues related this direction is also taken into account. That means there's a need to pay particular attention to other alternative data sources, such as administrative data, for instance. The use of government data is obvious alternative to collect data from the respondents, but this is not always solution, as in some cases, quality of administrative data is also challenging. The access to the data from administrative sources for statistical purposes is granted to the Geostat by the law on official statistics and is supported by government decrees which oblige different kind of public institutions to cooperate with us, with Geostat, and submit appropriate data upon request. Since over the last few years, Georgia has achieved significant progress in the development of national statistical system and implementation of international standards and internationally recognized best practices. New data sources have been identified, new technologies have been introduced, which was utmost important for filling data gaps and provide real-time data. This gave us opportunity to calculate more baseline indicators, which is essential for monitoring and evaluation progress on Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. However, despite the greater demand on statistical data, there is still a critical shortfall in the national efforts to develop appropriate and sustainable statistical capacity. I can say that at the moment, well-established cooperation and data exchange system between Geostat and owners of administrative data sources is in place. Geostat plays coordinated role in the national statistical system, but quality of data sources remains one of the key challenges. This is part of our permanent work and part of our future priorities.
Thank you. And I think that's beautifully said, that you're relying more and more on administrative sources to fill gaps, and you're getting good cooperation, but nevertheless there are challenges because the quality may not be fit for purpose. So we're going to explore what authority should a statistician have, if any, to influence that quality. But first we'll now move to Zasa, and I'm sorry I don't have a profile, one-page profile for you, Zasa, for Kazakhstan, but could you tell us a little bit about how things work in your country? Are you there, Zasa? Either you're sitting very still or you've frozen. Well, we might while we wait, maybe you can try a reconnection, Zasa, because we'd love to have you here and present. We've got another. We'll ask our next audience question, which goes to whether the NSO has a mandate. So can we post the next audience question, please? So our question now is, does your National Statistical Office have a clear mandate to act as a data steward for data used by your NSS? So this is the National Statistical Service data. I'm just going to go back to the Kazakhstan screen there while we've got it. Yep, good. Now, while we're waiting on Zasa, Taki, let's move on to you. You work in the field of modernization of official statistics. This is a very modern issue, isn't it? In New Zealand, the Statistics Act has been replaced by a Data and Statistics Act. So the government statistician is also the chief data steward with authority to play a broad role across the ecosystem. Is this the future, or will we see different approaches in different countries?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so well, you already showed the three types of governance that exist in the region or even globally. So it's difficult to say because ultimately it might lead to that, but it's many countries have a long way to go, and also other countries, some countries, they have already a very long history. What you clearly see in the regions like New Zealand, Australia, in general, the Anglo-Saxon countries never had a very strong reliance on administrative data for various purposes. So they are now making very fast and big steps because they have a big gap to fill. Other countries have a long history of using administrative data, so like Netherlands, Scandinavian countries. So there slowly they have gained a certain position and a certain within the national system of controlling the quality and the access to the data. So it's difficult to, ultimately they will move to a similar ideal, most likely, because it's more efficient and more practical, but the ways to it are of course very different. And in this Central Asian region, they all have a kind of a similar history, but also you see quite different pathways between Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan, and also the Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. So even countries with quite a similar background, they still have different pathways for political reasons, for resource reasons in the offices, but also the general public's opinion is developing quite differently in these countries, even though they have a very similar background, at least in a more recent history. So yeah, definitely, it's a good model, of course, because you centralize it and with a specialized agency that has a long history and quality, which is more independent than, for example, ministries. Although, like in the example of Kazakhstan, there's also a ministry on top, which is also quite independent, which is maybe not the ideal situation, but it works very well there. So yeah, it's difficult to come up with a general pathway and what it will be, because it's also different, but definitely it makes sense because it's more efficient. And of course, there is a big challenge also with resources. You need a lot of resources to take up that position. So even if they are, like Georgia, Geostat is very well positioned, it's also acknowledged by all ministries that they are a very strong leader, but they also need resources, of course. Otherwise, they cannot play that big role. So even if you have the acknowledgement of ministries, of the general public, that they should play the role, and it is an important role, yeah, they also need the resources, and they have to be able to, not only financial resources, also they have to be able to get the staffing with the salaries they can afford. So yeah, it's a complex problem. That's also why it's so good in this model that you have the 5 pillars, because it really shows the complexity, and that it's not addressing one issue, it's addressing a lot of issues if you want to reach to the situation which New Zealand is now heading for. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so as you point out, there's a lot of differences and long histories behind many of these developments, isn't there? There's the extent to which administrative data has been used, and as you point out, in some countries it's relatively recent development. I think your point about resourcing is a really important one. There's probably a message there for chief statisticians that if they've got an eye on this additional authority, they need to ask for resources as well, don't they? Now we've got, I believe we've got Zasa back. Can you hear me there, Zasa? Would you like to tell us a bit about the situation in Kazakhstan?
Hello. I'm sorry, but my connection is not very good, and sometimes it disappears for 20-30 seconds and then reconnects. I'm sorry.
Well, you're here and clear now. Good.
I'm very glad to have an opportunity to participate in this important event. I will briefly try to describe our situation. I should mention the important player. It's the Ministry of Digital Development of Kazakhstan, responsibilities of which include development of public services and data management. I would like to note that in Russian language there is no difference between words governance and management, and only one word is used for both governance and management. I don't know if it makes any difference, but you should know. So under the national program Digital Kazakhstan, the Ministry of Digital Development developed the information and communication service called Smart Data Hukumet, which means smart government, designed for collection, storage, and comprehensive analysis of data accumulated in government agencies' information systems. And the main purpose of this service is to provide government agencies with an analytical platform for making effective data-driven management decisions. All government agencies have to share all their data with the government platform, and if they need data from another government agency, they can get it using this service. In 2022, Ministry of Digital Development issued a document called Data Management Requirements. This document contains some data governance principles, data management policies, and rules. In particular, the requirements regulate the processes related to the definition, creation, collection, accumulation, storage, maintenance of data, as well as issues of quality, availability, and protection. In addition, the requirements define the responsibilities of a chief data officer and data stewards. It's
I think we just had a dropout. Is that right, Gogita? I can see you nodding, so we might wait for Zasa to rejoin us. That was interesting about the Russian language, the no difference between management and governance. So I'm interested in that. I mean, I think governance is often referred to as the making of policies and rules, and management is the application of them. But obviously it's often one and the same thing. And so we've got a question here from Neil Jackson in the chat. He says he's being slow, but I don't think so. What does it mean to act as a whole? Thank you, Zasha. We've got you back.
Yeah, I think I stopped at the document of the data management requirements, and the provisions of this document are mandatory for all government agencies in some government-controlled companies. And for the authorities of CASSTAT, its authorities, I think, quite significant. For example, according to law on statistics, all administrative sources should provide their data to us free of charge, use our classifiers, get our approval for their survey forms and methodologies. We also have a right to conduct on-site inspections to verify administrative data, identify forms and methodologies which were not sent for approval to CASSTAT.
Thank you.
Okay.
So you did well with the interruption. So you've got a Ministry of Digital Development, which is interesting, and in Georgia, Gagita, you've got the Digital Governance Agency, which has a mandate to provide state electronic services and support and develop digital government, information and cybersecurity. So that's potentially an agency that will have a role in the stewardship of data across the whole of government system. Before I get your answer on that, though, I'll just ask if the next audience question can be put up in the poll, which is whether NSOs should play a role in data governance beyond the NSS. So audience, you can think about that one. So sorry, Gagita, tell us a little bit about the role of this Digital Governance Agency and how you work with it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The Digital Governance Agency in Georgia was established a couple of years ago in 2020 with the aim to establish and develop the principles of digital governance in public administration. This agency is committed to carrying out its activities using an ecosystem based on information and communication technologies, introducing e-services and at the same time facilitating their development. Also achieving a form of governance based on digital trust. The functions of the agency are divided into three main dimensions. Those are digital governance, cyber and information security, and third one is information and technological support. Digital Governance Agency has a legal mandate to administer a data exchange infrastructure and frameworks and standards for the interoperability of electronic data and electronic services. I think that cooperation with this agency should help to enhance data sharing inside the National Statistical System, particularly when it comes to sharing information that contains personal data, you know. Mm-hmm. So in terms of work with this agency, this worth mention that representatives of this agency have noted that the data stewardship concept is a new and unknown issues for them and requires further study, further investigations. And beside that, the responsible agency has not yet been defined by the legislation. Recently, Digital Government Agency began to work in the framework of the U4 Digital Initiative. This is EU-funded project to assess the data governance issues in Georgia and get relevant recommendations on this on that topic. It is possible to connect these two projects, I mean data governance, data stewardship, and EU4 digital initiative, and in cooperation with Geostat, with our office, identify if they are a point of intersection. If such is found, the works should be planned in such a way that the topics do not overlap, and maybe these two projects will complement each other. And a few work also about cooperation. We have preliminary cooperation agreement with this agency's management or digital governance issues. It is clearly possible to find various forms of cooperation, in particular, for instance, by signing MOUs, creating working groups, and so on and so forth. Currently, Digital Governance Agency is not represented on the Geostat Council Managing Board. According to the law on official statistics of Georgia, only 3 civil servants are represented in the board of Geostat. Those are representatives from the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Central Bank, National Bank of Georgia. However, it is possible to consider including representative of this agency on the advisory board. So we have 2 boards. One is the managing board, and second is advisory board as a consultancy unit.
Thank you. So it sounds like you've got some interesting discussions ahead, but you're working quite collaboratively and nicely together with awareness that there's scope for overlap and the need to think carefully about, you know, the approach that's taken. It sounds good. Kiyom, Tajikistan is yet to create such an agency, right? You don't have an equivalent agency. Is that correct? But are there any plans in Tajikistan to strengthen data governance across government data, or is this not something that's a priority?
Thank you very much. Of course, yeah, we can say that yes, it was not created until the end of 2023, but at the end of the last year, there was created a new agency on innovation and digital technology under the President of the Republic of Tajikistan. This was created at the end of last year, and in the beginning, like last month, there was also appointed head of this agency. Still, we cannot say that we don't know real functions of this agency, but in general, as far we got information, it's relating to development, this e-government, and indeed, we, as I mentioned before, we had concept on e-government, and also we have another concept on digital economy from 2019. But still, there was a need to, like, for coordination of this work of turning to electronic or e-government. There is need to such kind of agency, and our government created this agency, and we hope that in the next future this agency will show good results for the country. And of course, as far as we know, it will not be kind of separately without agency on statistics. It should be together, because in terms of e-governance, we can say that statistical agency already had some good steps in terms of e-government. We already turned to all reports, statistical reports, electronically. Like from 2022, we started from 2016 actually. We turned step by step, but in 2022, we got a task from president that until the end of 2023, we have to finish to turn all these forms. And in last year, in the end of last year, we turned all, and now all the forms, like it's all the forms that statistical agency collected from enterprises or some reporters, as well as administrative reports, statistical reports, all already turned to electronically. And this is kind of one steps from our side that we are moving to e-government. And we hope that will help to this new agency in a like good cooperation with us and with other ministries as well, because here, as I mentioned earlier, we get data from ministries, like administrative data, only aggregated data, but in addition, statistical agency or we can say government needs like low-level data as well, like disaggregated data as well. So we hope that in cooperation with this agency, we will improve our electronic reports and get more data, reliable data, more quality data.
Thank you. So, as you point out, you know, statistical agencies have a lot to offer. These agencies that are trying to drive digital government, e-government, you know, as you point out, we've got a long history of disseminating information in electronic form, increasingly collecting information online, the ability to integrate data, to harmonize data with our standards, to manage the confidentiality of microdata. Yeah, so there's a lot there that statisticians bring to the table that will be of interest to these other agencies. I wonder, I've lost sight of Zasa. Do we still have you there, Zasa?
Yes.
Excellent, because my next question is to you. You have in your country this very interesting concept of a national data ecosystem. So there's a concept of the development of state statistics and the national data ecosystem. And in that concept, it's proposed that the Bureau of National Statistics should take on a role of data management coordination in the state data ecosystem. So it may not have happened yet, but clearly this is an idea that is being considered. Can you tell us how this happened and what was your agency's role in developing this concept, and what do you see the future? How do you see it playing out? Is it becoming a reality? Okay, it looks like we might have lost Zasa again with a little outage, so we're going to gracefully move on. I was really looking forward to an answer on that, though, because I think it is very interesting to hear this concept of a national data ecosystem with the statistical agency being asked to take the lead in it. So I hope we get to hear more about that. Take, let's talk a bit about this challenge of integrating data for the purposes of policy and research. You know, because researchers that I know are very interested in microdata. They don't really want the aggregate stuff. They want to be able to really get into the data in detail. And in many countries, the statistical legislation really hampers the statistician in their ability to expose data at the microdata level, albeit even if it's confidentialized or anonymized to a researcher. Do you think statistical legislation needs to be adapted to allow statisticians to be able to integrate data and expose it to researchers for research and policy purposes rather than production of official statistics?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, you can only cover so much with legislation, and there are always different situations, and who determines what is the scientific community, who determines who is a scientist that then also can access this data. So first, we have to keep also clear to the role of statistical officers, which is for the production of statistical data for policy making, which is also changing. It becomes more and more detailed data has to be made available, more timely data. So the difference between operational purpose data and statistical data, it's going closer and closer. It's moving. Statistics move towards more operational style data. You could see it very clearly with the COVID epidemic, where a lot of statistical offices provided very detailed data and got access to medical data that they normally would never have got access to. So these type of things, for example, you can never cover with legislation. So because the situation is very different. That's why also ethical frameworks are very important, because it's more important to have a very proper ethical framework that everybody, the general public, the government, and businesses understand, and also scientists. And on the basis of these ethical frameworks, you might not need very precise legislation also to give access to scientists, because if it's for the general good, like say for hardly anybody has any issue with giving access to very detailed information to a medical scientist. If they go to a hospital, they are willing to give very detailed information, personal information to them, so that they can improve the treatment and the chance of success and develop cures, etc. So in that situation, it's very clear to everybody the importance of it, and nobody will have any objections giving access, even if there's no legislation. They will sign it when they get the treatment because they see the importance. So with social scientists and others, it's a bit more difficult because they don't see the direct link with the benefits. But also there, depending on the situation what the country is in, what is there, people might see the importance of giving access to very detailed data, even if it's not covered strictly by legislation. So you need flexible legislation that allows it, but you also need ethical frameworks to make it acceptable for the general audience, and also to decide when it makes sense to give access. And in the past, they would give like in-house access to scientists to microdata collected by the statistical offices, of which they had then also the governance and the authority to give access. And then they couldn't reveal information. In other cases, now what you see more and more, they give remote access with all kind of security. They have to sign affidavits that they will not do anything with the information. So there are all kind of solutions that are backed up by legislation, but legislation is not enough. And another thing is also we have also a lot of meetings on confidentiality. And if you give access to aggregate data and you can request a limited number of aggregates, you can identify every single person. So in an absolute sense, confidentiality doesn't really exist. Privacy doesn't exist because the interviewer knows every detail, but also confidentiality doesn't really exist as long as you have enough access to the ability to generate aggregate tables, crosstabs. Ultimately, it's very difficult. So it's also an illusion to think that you, by not giving access to private information, you have a better protection, because they have other ways of revealing the information. So it's also a lot about communication, and as I said, these ethic frameworks about considerations when and what is allowed people to do, because you also need the scientists. If we get access to the microdata, they will still have to have their own ethics at work, that they're not checking what the neighbor did or what a specific celebrity person did. So you need much more than just legislation. That is maybe you need legislation that allows it, and it should be allowed because it's for the importance of the country. But you also need like ethical frameworks to decide, okay, when can we give access and when maybe not, and to what extent we can give access.
Yeah, I think so as you point out, so probably if your legislation is overly restrictive, you need to change your legislation to give you some flexibility. It's interesting in Georgia, the board of Geostat, and Gurgita can correct me if I'm wrong, but the board of Geostat can actually approve procedures for access to data to researchers. So there's some flexibility in the governance arrangements there. In my own country, in Australia, the legislation is deliberately somewhat vague, so the data can only be released in a manner likely, and that's subject to a lot of interpretation, and that's where you bring your ethical frameworks into play. But thank you. So I think
sorry, I'm back.
Thank you, Zasa. And I don't know if I shared my question with you earlier, but could you tell us about this
I heard your question.
Yeah, could you tell us about this concept of a national data ecosystem and the role you might play in that?
Yes.
you.
And this concept, yes, was prepared by the Bureau of National Statistics. We studied the experience of many countries and came to conclusion that we need to build an effective data ecosystem in Kazakhstan. We had, of course, high ambitions. According to a concept, we wanted the BNS to be the data management coordinator in Kazakhstan. But the Ministry of Digital Development didn't like the idea of being only IT management coordinator. So during the discussions, we argued that the data management issues are quite broad and include such areas as data security, data archiving, etc. And also they said that they manage the government information systems and implement many projects. For example, like Smart Bridge, which is aimed at the mutual integration of all government agencies' information systems and databases and facilitate all integration procedures. And this issue of data management coordinator was discussed at the high level, and it was decided that it will be the Ministry of Digital Development. And the Bureau of National Statistics will have a role of a body ensuring the quality of data, including administrative data.
Oh.
And currently the changes to the law on statistics are being discussed in our parliament. And I believe these changes will be approved and the Bureau will get some additional functions in relation to administrative data. And our ideas of the concept are being successfully implemented. For example, in order to improve the management of government data in the national data ecosystem, we developed a digital service, National Reference Information, which is currently operating in test mode. Also, we can mention the project of
Oh, we have a short outage again. I was quite fascinated by that. So there's been interesting developments on the area of the whole of government data ecosystem, but very interesting there that the Bureau of National Statistics was still going to maintain a role around managing the quality of administrative data. And if Zasa comes back, I'm keen to ask him what that will look like, because I think it may see them taking on some sort of a data quality audit role, which would be very interesting. So we want to leave plenty of time for audience questions. So we'll wrap up this panel discussion soon. But what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists to take a bit of a trip, a trip into the future. It's clear we've heard that there's no, one size fits all solution or arrangement that should be applied. Each country has its own history and context. It's also apparent that new arrangements are subject to a lot of negotiation, take a lot of time to evolve. But if I could ask each of you just to hop into your time machine and look at the future, say the next 5 to 10 years, and share with us what reforms you would like to see in your own countries. And of course, Teka, you can be a bit broader than that if you like. But Gurgita, would you like to start? Welcome back, Zasu. I'll come back to you with a question in a minute.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, can I?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So actually, nowadays, global interest to the disaggregated data is increasing, right?
Yep.
And from past experience, we learned that only traditional data collection methods, such as surveys, may not be sufficient to address this increased demand. This is one of the main reasons why do we need to develop and test the use of new data sources and modern technologies for production of official statistics, such as big data, such as scanner data, web scraping, and etc. I can say that the new data ecosystem provides opportunities for filling existing data gaps, but at the same time, it is not easy to play leadership role in collection and dissemination of data. which also require additional resources and additional efforts as well. I think at first stage, for better utilization of public and private data for decision making and for policy execution, there is a need to define the roles and responsibilities of relevant institutions involved in the system. In this direction, the law and official statistics plays always at most important role, but many issues in sometimes are defined by the law, but it doesn't work properly in practice, you know, and additional efforts are needed to be undertaken from NSOs. Except this, more support is needed from the government. NSOs are professionally independent bodies, but in most cases, they are not able to solve existing problems independently. At the same time, strong partnership and collaboration with international organizations are needed. It is up to us how we address current challenges. It is absolutely up to us deal with needs and opportunities. It depends on us how we do it individually or as a part of international community. As I already mentioned, it is not easy to play leadership role in collection and dissemination of data. Anyway, NSO should play more active coordinating role in this process, as they are more familiar with statistical and analytical tools. They speak the language of numbers, you know, and they know very well how dealing with data. I think there's a need for coordinated capacity building, cooperation and coordination between statisticians and owners of data sources need to be strengthened, and statistical systems need to be developed to ensure establishment of reliable and transparent statistical system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Keon, would you like to give us your views on what you'd like the future to look like in 5 to 10 years' time?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gogita, for good points. Yeah, of course, I agree with him. So in general, there are a lot of issues rising to statistics office, NSOs. But as I mentioned here, as Tajikistan created new agency, so we still we don't know what will happen, which functions the government gives to this new agency, and we will cooperate, of course, with them. Of course, in a 5-10 years, that what we want to see is, first of all, is we can say that single integrated data hub in the country with the highest security. Like, security is one of the very important issues nowadays, because it may cyber attacks maybe happens, and another thing that we want and also I forgot to mention that we are on the process of adoption new law on official statistics. So we established it, and it's a last processes. And there is in Article 20 there is mentions about independence of statistical agency, and we hope that this independence will help us to create more quality data, more timely data, like we can collect them on time based on this. And another thing that we want to see in the next future is maximizing the quality of the data and reducing the costs. Of course, as we are turning to electronic reporting or some electronic, it's one of the steps to reducing the cost and increasing the quality. So here I mentioned one thing that it may happen in maybe 20 years or 10 years. It's one of these things is using artificial intelligence. So it's like more popular nowadays. So we hope in the data system, data governance, it will be used in the next future. And one of the important thing, lastly, I want to mention, it's that data literacy, we can say, to increase the literacy of importance of the data governance to employers and to know how effectively use the data in their roles. These things I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we can all agree with those. And if you've got an interest in how artificial intelligence may be applied, there was a very interesting contribution in our last panel, wasn't there, Rachel? And I think a link is visible there in the third of our cafes there, which you might find very interesting. You mentioned a single integrated data hub, and I think that's something a number of countries have developed data integrations, and that's been key to them demonstrating the value of the data for research purposes. You know, so I think I'm not sure whether, as you pointed out, the cybersecurity challenges are significant. So it's an interesting question whether we should be putting all our eggs in one basket or whether we should have a number of integrations in the hands of a number of custodians so that it's not all in the one place. But I hope the future, as you see it in 5 to 10 years' time, is realised. Taiki, what would you like to see happen?
Yeah, I think well, there were very good points made already by Guillaume and by Gogita, so I completely agree with all of them. So they're very, very relevant. So yeah, I would like to stress especially the position and how the Stats Office is seen is very important. So if we talk about data access, data governance, we're talking about statistical data. We're not talking about data. We don't want to have, don't want to manage, just to give an example of what is coming up to most statistical offices. It's scanner data from supermarkets, it's bank transaction data, it's mobile phone data. We don't want to manage that data. We don't want to have anything to do with that. We want to have a role in deciding what of that information for statistical purposes should go to statistical agencies, and to what extent can they control the quality, of course, but they don't want to have anything to do with managing the data, the microdata there, or giving access. For example, we were talking about researchers. We don't want to have the Stats Office giving researchers access to microdata from mobile phone companies, all that type of stuff. So we're talking really about for statistical purposes. So the position and how the Stats Office is seen is very, very important. That it is seen as an independent organization from the government, that it is only collecting this information for statistical purposes, which means for policy making, for the general public to make decisions about the government, if the government is doing a good job, for businesses to make good decisions, so they invest make their investments in the proper way, and that they can check also the government, and the people can check the companies. So it's very important that is the purpose of statistical offices. So with the role that they will have in data stewardship and all, we're all talking about from this role. So it's very important that the vision, that how the statistical office is perceived, is very important. So it was mentioned by Guillaume, I think also the literacy is very important, that people understand the role and interpretation of data and what it means and what it is for, so that you don't get all these stories about well, we had Canada, Netherlands, Ireland, Australia, all of them had to appear before Parliament because of questions of access to microdata and of specific interest groups that they were controlling the population, which is of course absolute nonsense, but those perceptions exist. So it's very important that in the future, the Stats Offices are really seen as independent organizations that have no interest in microdata and controlling people, but that want to provide good information to be more efficient and make good decisions in the country. And that from that role, they need access to a lot of information from banks, from social media. It can be big data, it can be administrative data, and of course then they also need, since it's their specialty, a role in the quality, in data stewardship, of managing these data sources, but only for the purpose of having good quality information that they can use for statistical purposes. So I think this is everything that Gogita and Guillaume and I'm sure also Sasa will mention, because the situation is very similar what they plan in Kazakhstan, is the statistical literacy, strengthening the position, independence, which means good resources, because that's often still lacking. They have the independent position in many countries, but if you don't have resources, you're not independent, because you can't do anything and you can't decide. Even if you have it, even if the legislation, everything, if the public doesn't trust you, it's still useless to have all of it. So yeah, the overall package and the image and the status, I think, of statistical office, that for me is the most important, to improve that further. And of course, that goes along with all what Gogita and Guillaume mentioned about resources, about access to information. And as was mentioned before, you can have it's much more efficient to have an agency manage data sources and digitalization, because the stats office is not a specialty. They have to focus on the key tasks. Important is that they have a say about the control and what information has to be delivered to them and what they can do with it. So that's in short, I think, yeah, just echoing what the others say, but on top of it, especially the very, very importance of how the stats office is perceived and all the accompanying what they need for it.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you mentioned the key word there around trust. You know, people need to trust that their data is being managed and used appropriately for statistical purposes. And so we all have a stake in how well the overall ecosystem maintains trust of the community, because we're not necessarily judged on our own records, are we? If another government agency does it badly, it'll affect us all. So I think there we all have to take an intense interest in how sensitive data is handled and disseminated and used, because it will impact on the statistical system one way or another. Zasa, you're back, I think.
Yes.
Excellent. Can I just drill down on one little question, which was your future role around managing the quality of data. So can you tell us what that's likely to look like? Are you likely to be auditing administrative agencies to assess the quality of their data? Is that how it will work?
Yes. We have developed the quality assessment criteria for administrative data, and these criteria are included in the data management requirements. They include the fundamental principles of official statistics and our criteria, for example, like relevance, accuracy, timeliness, clarity, comparability, coherence, accessibility, credibility. We also will introduce a new institution of data inspectors or data controllers. This is different from data stewards. You know, each government organization in Kazakhstan has a list of data stewards. It's usually 2 or 3 people responsible for the implementation of data management requirements. But these data inspectors, we have a separate entity called the Data Processing Center, and data inspectors are part of this center. These people should have, of course, a proper education and work experience in the area of statistics and data analytics. Their main job will be to assess the quality of administrative data and their compliance with the requirements on data management. Data inspectors will monitor and analyze the databases of administrative bodies, and if needed, they will conduct on-site inspections to verify administrative data. We actually call this as data audit. And based on the results of the analysis, data inspectors submit to the Bureau reports on the quality of administrative data for our consideration and possible.
Okay, so we lost Asa there, but that's quite fascinating, the idea that they've got a data inspection, an audit role across government. I don't think, do either of Georgia or Kazakhstan have, or Tajikistan, sorry, have such an arrangement? I wouldn't think so. No. So we'll move on to some questions from the audience now. But before we do that, we'll just throw up a couple in the chat, a couple of additional poll questions around their word cloud questions. So if you could give us 2 or 3 words representing what you consider to be the biggest risk in the increased sharing and integration of government data. And we'll throw up the other question as well, which is what is the biggest obstacle to effective data governance of government data? We'll put that up as well. So let's see if we can get some questions from our audience. Please put them in the chat there. We've got one. It's a pretty challenging one, actually. It's about they've picked an example.
I'm back. Sorry.
Welcome back, Sasa. Okay, so we're going to move on to some questions from the audience, but thank you for that explanation of your data inspection role and your development of a data quality framework for administrative data. I think that'll be of considerable interest to all countries. Was there? You mentioned you drew on the official principles for statistics, but were there any similar? Were you able to find a good role model for your quality framework elsewhere?
I think we mainly use the National Quality Assurance Framework of the United Nations. So we based our criteria on this model.
Okay. Well, I've got a tricky audience question here around improving coordination and access and comparability around cross-country migration data. So, Keon, do you have a comment on this? So, I guess we're being focused on how we better coordinate and manage within a country, let alone across international systems. What do you see as the main barriers? Can you see that question?
Yes, I got the question. So, of course, migration is one. Data on migration is kind of one big issues like was raised last year's in our country because there is always like we can say 2 data based on countries, migration or like to the countries that accept or to the countries that flows from. It's always 2 different countries because the purpose or the duration of the stay, it's like change this data based on the countries. And some, especially as far we know, we have migrants that working in Russian federations. So there is some we can say that some issues in this data, but we did like kind of meeting with Statistical Office of Russian Federation, and we tried to solve. But still, there is some things that we need to cooperate with them. So we hope that we will come up with one decision to finalize the process, or we can say the methodology that calculate or collect this data, migration data.
Thank you. All right, audience, now's the time. Please put your hand up or put your question in the chat. Gurgita, can I ask you a question? So, you know, let's say you're trying to produce better statistics around migration, and there's a problem with the quality of the data coming from the government agency that manages the borders So how do you deal with that at present? You know, what authority do you have to promote better quality data?
Thank you for the question. Actually, it was a question also from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So production of migration statistics in Georgia is absolutely based on administrative data sources coming from border cross statistics. We have full access with these data for statistical purposes, but issues related quality in some cases is still challenging, and this is part of our permanent work. So to improve this direction, we actually conduct a regular meeting with owners of administrative data sources.
Right.
And we work closely these two institutions. So to solve these existing problems. Also, this is issues related international migration. Another issue is statistics related internal migration. For instance, big data sources coming from mobile phone operators has the potential to produce human mobility statistics such as internal migration and such as domestic tourists. In this case, the most challenging issue is access to data. These data are privately held data coming from mobile phone operators. We drafted methodology, we developed some criteria how to calculate, how to move forward, but access to the data is still challenging.
Yeah. So that's
There's
now
a
you're
need to
moving.
work closely with owners of data sources.
Yeah. So now you're moving into this challenging area of private sector data and the extent to which you can access that. But if you abstract a bit from the problem of not necessarily migrant data, but you've got a problem with the data, you work collaboratively with the data owner. That's great. You have meetings and you discuss it. There's probably limits to how much they can improve their data, either because they don't have the resources or they don't have a real interest in doing the work. So then, as you point out, your response may be to find other data rather than just improve the quality. Yeah. So none of these scenarios where there's data quality issues are that straightforward, are they? I wonder if any countries are going to have the concept of data as a national asset. Taiki, have you seen this anywhere? I mean, the idea that if you're an immigration department, you're collecting data not just for yourself, but as a national asset that has broader applications. Could that be a path forward where we classify some key data sets as sort of strategic assets that need to be managed for a number of purposes, including official statistics?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's also about the whole original story. But we need the data for proper policy making. With migration, of course, there's also political sensitivity there in most countries, especially these days. There's a lot of pressure on immigration in many countries in the region and between countries, and we have now very big issues with censuses in several Balkan countries because of ethnic groups, whether they grew or not, and then they ban the census completely because they don't want it to be measured, or they want to be visible that they're smaller or bigger. So it's not only about immigrants, foreign immigrants that look different, but it's also about existing groups. So it's not so simple to. So it's important that people understand the importance of it, but there's so many sensitivities that makes it very complex, and it's. So I also worked in the population division, and you have in New York also with trade, you have the same issue. And there, of course, we can't have people migrating to the moon. So all the estimates of all countries from 1950 to now, they have to be imbalanced because there has to be zero global migration, except maybe for a few people that died in space or that are in the space station. So, and you can't, because the figures are always different. I also worked in from the Netherlands at Talise in the Caribbean, which is part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. We have a population register there. It's a very good population register, same as in the Netherlands. We have all kind of checks and balances with schools, driver's licenses. If you rent a house, that it's checked with the population register and everything. But still, we have a census there, and we need a census there because the administrative data is not sufficiently of quality because migration is huge there. Some years you have that 10% of the population migrates and another 15 or 10% of the population comes in. So the quality does not of the registers, even though they're very, very good, they're the best quality like in the Netherlands. There's so much migration that you cannot keep track of, especially immigrants that don't register. And you have a lot of illegal immigration with the conflict in Venezuela and others. So it's very important that all agencies, so it's not one source you can use. You need multiple sources like Ogita mobile phone data with mobility, with moves to see are your administrative records correct. You might need survey data. You might need the border agencies. So it's a multiple social media, and everybody has to see the importance that to get a good picture of the situation of migration, but it can also be of other topics. All have to realize that we have to do to get, it's of everybody's interest to have the best possible picture. So in certain areas it's easy because you have control over it, over the border agencies, and about administrative records, but others it's more difficult. Like doctors often have information about illegals which others don't have access to, but they will not never give that information. So yeah, it's not so simple as it looks. It's of course would be.
I don't think it looks at all simple.
No, it's very complex, and especially with migration, with political sensitivity makes it an issue. So it's.
But if we put immigration to one side and we can pick another data item. It might be dog registrations, right? So less sensitive. If you decided that this was an important issue, then the people that register dogs might be required to manage that data as a national asset. You know, they might say, well, I only need to know that people have paid for their dog. I don't need to worry about the breed or the color. But there's a broader purpose for the data. So yeah, my question was, can you see a future where agencies might be held accountable for managing data for more than their own purpose?
Yeah, I think that also leads into that whole story about the purpose of statistical office and the general good. So if information, if the benefits for the general good are bigger than the, how do you call it, the negative for the individual or for the data holder or for, then there has to be an agreement that is possible to collect that information and to be responsible to deliver more on the data than they would need strictly for their own purpose. Yeah.
And they need to be resourced to do that, in addition to having the responsibility to do that.
But it's a good way. This is a good way again to get the buy-in, because then people see the importance of it. And in one area they might not see it, but in this area they see it. So then suddenly they might also be more easily convinced that in other areas it's equally relevant, because they have something they can identify with for them what is important.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got an interesting question on the typology that I displayed in the in my introductory comments. Where we classified basically the systems according to whether the NSO was a partner, a leader, or a collaborator, or someone else was a leader. Actually, I can pop up the slide, but I'll do that. While I do that, Kiom, can you see that question? Do you think there'll be benefit in using these profiles to identify countries in a similar situation to you and working with them to talk about different options?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Of course, this profile was well prepared, and as far as we know that NSO is kind of a leader, has a leader role, but it has some differences between the countries, as we saw. For example, Kazakhstan mentioned that the kind of leading role is Minister of Digitalization. But in our case, we can say that NSO now has a leading role in data, and of course it's collaborating with other ministries and agencies.
Thank you. Zasa, do you think you'll look at these profiles and have discussions with a few other NSOs that you think are in a similar category to yourself? We might have lost Zasa again. Keon?
Sorry?
Sorry, I'd already talked to you. Sorry, Gugita.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Yeah.
You answered it very well. I'm not asking you to answer it again.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think collaboration more closely with NSOs, with other NSOs, may be beneficial for both parties. As I already mentioned during my speech, it is up to us how we address challenges. It depends absolutely on us how we do it individually or as part of international community. But if we will establish more collaboration, more strong partnership with different countries, with different NSOs, we will benefit a lot from this cooperation.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think these cafes have been an excellent vehicle for promoting both an understanding of how the different countries are traveling along this journey and an appreciation of the differences in context and the similarities in the data governance arrangements that could be very fruitful grounds for discussion. So I thank you, panel, for your patience and your care in preparing and answering the questions. And I'm going to hand over to Rachel now to wind us up.
Thank you so much, and huge thank you to all the panelists today. So as you know, this was the fourth and the final cafe in this series of kind of 4 cafes on data governance. And although we've been looking at the same broad topic of data governance in each of the cafes, I think we've just had such very different discussions and heard about lots of different issues, which has really made it extremely fascinating and very difficult to actually sum up and try to come up with any concluding remarks, may I say, as well. But I think one of the things that we have seen through the cafes has been how helpful it is to have that shared data governance framework to also help us to actually try to be using the same language. Although I completely appreciate as well what we were hearing today, that even when we think we've kind of done that and we've got the same language, when we translate it into perhaps our own native language, some of the subtleties are lost, because it is complicated when we are dealing with multiple different languages and we're using these different terms like governance and management, meaning these being the same word in Russian. So I think we always do need to be mindful of that to make sure that when we're having those conversations, we are talking about the same things. So the governance profiles that we've developed as well, I think, have really helped us to explore these issues in more detail. And let me say at that point as well, a huge thank you to Neil Jackson, who I know is joining us today, because he was working with us last year and helped us to develop the data governance framework and to start that work on actually developing these one-page data governance profiles. And thank you as well to all of the participants. And I know, Gugita, you were there at the expert group we had last year when we were talking about the framework as well, and others were. So that was really helpful. And I think, what we've seen as well is that every situation is very different. The drivers can be very different for actually improving data. And it could be around, this push towards better e-government in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, whereas in Georgia, we see more of a drive around that need for granular data and a real acceptance that surveys just can't meet that need. And they also want to reduce costs and therefore moving more towards using administrative data sources. But we also saw, throughout the different discussions that actually the history and the context of country really does affect the data governance framework and the different roles that different institutions play. I think today we heard a lot, which perhaps was slightly different, around, you know, the fact that legislation is important, but legislation isn't enough. We all need that really strong partnership and collaboration at the kind of within a country, but also I think, as we were just beginning to touch on there as well, between countries as well. I think we also heard today, which we haven't, well, perhaps we heard a little bit in the first cafe, was about the importance of ethics as well in everything that we do, and that we'll need to build trust. So I just briefly tried to summarize there, but I would say at the end of this session, all 4 cafes have been recorded, so they're available to watch. We will also be summarizing key messages, and we'll be feeding those into the UN Statistical Commission seminar on data governance, which is Friday next week. So I hope some of the people online will be actually there in person in New York to attend that one. We will also attempt to summarize some of the key messages and put them into a short video to share. We will tidy up the one-page data governance profiles that we have and make them available, which we haven't kind of really been making them available so far. If you would like us to work with you on developing a data governance profile for your country, then please also do get in touch with me or get in touch with my team, because, you know, we really do want to do those, and we want to make these as useful as possible, because I think what we've shown through these cafe sessions is that there's only so much we can put into the profile, but what's really useful is using those as a starting point to actually have the discussion and hear a bit more. We will be, like I say, we'll make those profiles available and continue the discussions. What also came up actually today and at some of the earlier sessions is lots of new topics for future Stats Cafes. So please also do get in touch if you have any of those. But I know we heard today about, you know, the use of AI, and we heard about that actually at the Stats Cafe last week. And there was definitely one speaker who we know could talk to us about that. We also, I think, any other topics, please feel free to let us know. But I think another topic we might look at would be quality assurance. And I think we'd like to delve into a bit more detail from what we were just beginning to touch on in the sessions today. So it just remains for me to say huge thank you to Jonathan for moderating all 4 cafes, to our panelists today, all the past panelists, and all the participants as well. We really appreciate everybody kind of actively engaging, and it gives us so much more insight into the situations in the countries. So thank you so much. I hope to see some of you next week in person.